All right. Good evening, everyone. My name's Damon Wilson. I'm Executive Vice President here at the Atlantic Council. I'm just delighted to welcome you to this council event for, I think, what is a very appropriate, very timely discussion on American strategy with an exceptional strategic thinker, General Wesley Clark. Thank you for being here tonight. I'd like to offer a special welcome to General Clark himself and to Karen Tramontano, who I'll take the stage in just a moment to introduce the General, both of whom I can refer to as my bosses, as Atlantic Council board directors here, as well as Vago Muradian from Defense News, who's going to be moderating the conversation with General Clark shortly. I'm particularly delighted because one of my bosses used to be Lord Robertson, NATO Secretary General, who was a partner in crime with General Wesley Clark when he served as SACIR at NATO headquarters. Here at the Atlantic Council, the Brent Scowcroft Center, which Barry Pavel, who's with us this evening, the Scowcroft Center on International Security, has recognized that in an increasingly complex world, the United States and its allies face much more intricate and shifting challenges than ever before, and that this changing security environment from the Middle East, the rise of China, the economic challenges in the West, the ongoing crisis in Russia and Ukraine, and the accelerating pace of technical change suggests that a more volatile future, a future where the role of the United States is still not adequately defined. In order to grapple with these constraints and these challengers, we believe that leaders need a strategy to shape the future. And that's why the Atlantic Council and the Brent Scowcroft Center in particular are placing strategy and strategic thinking at the center of our work today, especially as part of a new effort that Barry is helping to lead here with Governor Huntsman, America's role in the world. And as part of the Council's effort to inject strategic thinking into the dialogue about the challenges the United States and its allies face, it's just a delight to begin this conversation and host Wesley Clark, a retired four-star general, a former Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, a renowned strategist, a former presidential candidate, to help kick off this conversation. You know he's completed a new book, Don't Wait for the Next War, Strategy for American Growth and Global Leadership. I hope you were able to pick up a copy in the lobby. If not, you can do so afterwards. And in the book, I think, like the Atlantic Council, General Clark, he recognizes the United States is facing a potential historic inflection point, similar to that of 1945 and 1989. So as General Clark speaks about his strategic vision for America, I encourage all of you to join the conversation, and those of you that are joining us online to join the conversation by sharing your thoughts and submitting your questions on Twitter using the hashtag AC Strategy. That's Atlantic Council Strategy. So we're delighted to have you with us, General Clark, and I'm honored now to turn the podium over to Karen Tramontano. Karen is the CEO of Blue Star Strategies, founder and president of the Global Fairness Initiative, adjunct professor at Georgetown Law, and of course an Atlantic Council board director. But she's one of those leaders that shares the Council's priority for strategy. Throughout her distinguished career, she served as Deputy Chief of Staff to President Clinton, where she got involved in many of the issues that were related to European security and NATO, where we were able to work together. She's also served as counsel in the U.S. Senate, Chief of Staff to the Mayor of D.C. Karen continues to shape many important global policy issues with the type of forward-thinking, strategic mindset so critical in light of today's challenges. And with that, I'm particularly pleased to turn it over to someone who's a personal friend and mentor as well. Karen, please, the stage is yours.
Well, I am absolutely honored to be here, and thank you very, very much, Damon. And I'm honored to be a member of the board. You know, every once in a while you get asked to do something that you're absolutely tickled about, and introducing Wes Clark is one of those opportunities for me. Let me just say a couple of words about the book. He's going to talk more about it, but I think there's a number of people, especially in this town, who would say the U.S. has lost its way, hasn't had a big idea, a strategic approach in a long time. Some people might say the last big idea we had was to expand NATO, and we haven't really had a big think since then. And General Clark's book, I believe, aims to rectify and fill that vacuum. It's a must-read. I do recommend that you grab it on the way out, and hopefully get the general to sign it before this event is over. But as Damon said, there is a lot going on in the world, and I know all of you are well versed in the complexities, but it's incredibly hard to manage to get your arms around it. You wake up every morning and it's a new topic. And I think what the general's book brings to this is an outline, not only of a strategy, but an outline of a purpose and an approach in the way leaders should be thinking about the world today, the way leaders should be thinking about the challenges that are presented, the way we should manage those challenges, and the opportunities that many of those challenges present for leadership and for engagement and for really crafting a way forward for the future. So I, again, am thrilled to introduce Wes. I'm going to say a couple of words about his bio. So as Damon said, former Supreme Allied Commander, which is when I had the distinct pleasure of both meeting and working with Wes in the White House. He's currently Chairman and CEO of Wesley K. Clarkson Associates. He also served as the commander of the U.S. Southern Command. In the early 90s, the general was the director for strategic planning and policy for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He's been a recipient of awards too numerous to mention, both U.S. and foreign military awards, but he's been awarded the Silver and Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and in August of 2000, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So he is one of the superstars that we have in the United States. We should be proud that he's here with us today. I'm proud to call him my friend, General Wesley Clark.
So much, Karen. Thanks, Karen, and thanks, Damon, and it's so great to see so many old friends here. I'm just thrilled to be here with you. I didn't know that I was going to write this book, and it's the only, I've written 4. The other ones were, this is the book that I don't care if it sells, I just want people to read it, because it's just my passion. This country needs a strategy. It needs to see its way forward in the world. I am so tired of hearing about the dresses that Kim Kardashian wears or doesn't wear and making news. And all of what we're bombarded with is so immediate. There's no depth to it, and no wonder poll after poll after poll from the American people says we're going in the wrong direction. They don't even know what that means when they say it, but they feel it. So what I try to do was set up a framework that you could use and then look at where we're headed as a country. So it's a typical sort of a military framework. You say, well, what's the threat, and then what are you going to do about it? And the threat is there's 5 long-term challenges that we have to face as a nation. And then the problem is that when you in the military op order format, you look at your own forces, such and such artillery, et cetera, et cetera. Well, here we look at our own country, and we are at an inflection point. Our power is relatively declining in relation to China, and there are some factors for it that can be addressed. And we haven't lived up to our potential. And all of the challenges we face, they all have a lot in common. They're all international and domestic. They all require public and private partnership. They all extend beyond incumbencies. There's no simple solution for any of them. And so it's very hard for the people to get a grasp on this. But in the 1953, Eisenhower made a huge break with every previous president. We'd never had a strategy in peacetime. We lurched through expanding across the continent. We fought a civil war. When we finally had to fight World War I, we mobilized 10 million men, got rid of them in 2 years. Same thing in World War II, gave up on it. And when Ike came in 53, he said, what divides us domestically as Democrats and Republicans is less important than the challenge of evil that's confronting us from abroad. And I'm sort of paraphrasing his inaugural. But he said we had to pull together as a nation to deal with this existential threat from abroad. And he set this in motion. And he said something else. He said, it's not about war, it's about preventing war. And to do that, you have to have some structure in the American economy that does certain things. He built the military-industrial complex, didn't like it too much, worried about it, realized the hazard, but he built it. That's what we need today. It's not a grand strategy, it's a national strategy. Grand strategy is like the game of Risk, you know, it's like how many armies go to which country, and this is my country, that's your country, and that's the wrong approach. It's starting here with what's in America to keep us safe so that we can grow and have power to do and face these long-term challenges. And then we'll always have crises. When Jan Lowell and I were there in 1994 in the Pentagon together, we worked every day. Saturday and Sunday there was a crisis. Every weekend people were exhausted. They were meeting themselves, coming and going. Sunday afternoon White House meetings, papers due on Monday morning, can't finish it on Friday night, let's come in on Saturday, just again and again and again. There's always going to be that. It doesn't matter how many things you've got. But if you don't have a vision, and if the country doesn't feel there's a vision going forward, then there's pandemonium, chaos, and loss of respect for the United States, and it makes our leadership challenge that much greater. So with that as an introduction, let's talk about some of these issues, and please welcome this distinguished journalist, and let's go after it.
Very good, sir. When I think you're supposed to be here, I'm supposed to be here. Well, it's an honor to be here. I was telling the general that I had the opportunity to interview him, and this time I get to moderate a book discussion, so I think that's pretty cool. And one of the things, you know, after having read the book, one of the things that I enjoy, you know, I'm one of the people who looks at defense as a vast ecosystem, and you can have a butterfly flapping its wings in some place, and it has all sorts of impacts, and you know, eventually it does become a tsunami on the other side of the world. And what was really neat about this is you frame so many of the things that are the bigger challenges, including some of the things that people think are sort of non-obvious challenges, right? For example, wealth accumulation on the street, investment patterns, stock ownership things that we did. And so, you know, what the general does really interestingly is actually go through a little bit of the history of how it is we got here on all of these multiple.
Yeah, I got it in there.
You managed to get it in there, but you also tie it in. And as I was saying, you know, on some pages you read, there are more really good ideas and policy solutions to some of those things than you'll find in a lot of reports that may or may not come, certainly not from this think tank because they're all like highly value added and everything, but sometimes, you know, it's really good to sort of see, you know, right down to, for example, some of the tax credits that you propose that would actually improve cybersecurity because that's a major capital investment, and companies don't want to admit they have a problem because the minute they have a problem, they have to invest money in order to do it, and so it was an interesting structure. But you mentioned over there at the start, you know, the 5 challenges, and you discussed them. Talk to us a little bit about what you see as the challenges and what are some of the things that we've got to do to try to address them.
Well, I tried to look at the big picture. So we're going to have a terrorist challenge for a long time because Islam is in the middle of a multi-century effort to come to terms with the West. I mean, how can you be God's chosen people, revealed through Muhammad, his prophet, confirmed by the rapid conquest of most of the known world within a few decades after Muhammad's death, and then confront these barbarians starting in the 1700s who were infidels, who never had civilization, and suddenly they're wealthier, smarter, more technically competent, and Islam is still struggling with this. And one of the tenets of modernization, of course, of Islam is one of the 3 major schools was to go back to the beginning. That's Wahhabism. And it says if we could just be more pure and go back to the way it was with the followers of Muhammad, God would return and give us the power that we had then. Or that's the sort of broad brush analogy. And we've put trillions of dollars into supporting Saudi Arabia's buying their oil, and they've recycled billions of dollars in their support of their extremist interpretation of Islam and Sharia law. And so they've created this much of the breeding ground from which the terrorists have sprung, and particularly that's the case right now with ISIS. And the Qataris as they told me on my first visit there, said, "We're Wahhabis too." Oh, I know,
Yes.
I know. Believe me, and
We have
everybody
ample
understands
evidence
that
of that
today.
at this point.
So that's a problem that's going to be with us for a long time as Islam struggles to accommodate, modernize, and figure out what to do. And it does promote this concept of jihad and sacrifice and martyrdom. So the second is cybersecurity. I mean, we built it. And Jan Lowell and I used to compare our cell phones and say whose was better, and when we didn't even really have Netscape done in the mid-1990s. And yet, you look at it today, and in 1994, the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs called me down through the secretary. She says, "You have to go to Admiral Owen's office right now." So I drop everything, I run down to Bill Owen's office. So shut the door, Wes, and there's a guy in there with a handcuff on his suitcase, and he opens it up, and this is just really, really, really secret. But we could destroy a country's electricity grid. Yes, without dropping a bomb. No kidding, no kidding. We called this, I mean, first of all, we compartmentalized it, and nobody could talk about it, but it was called information warfare. And then, we thought we were really ahead of this, and in 1999, 2 Chinese colonels published something called unrestricted warfare, and they're not only talking about electricity grids, they're talking about the whole thing: banking, railroads, airlines, sewage, water, and electric power. They could completely disable a country. And we are the ones most vulnerable to it. And we've had real difficulty coming to grips with this because, as you said, people don't want to admit it. Number 2, it costs money. Number 3, it's international. And number 4, there's something about cyber reconnaissance that nobody really wants to talk about. But, cyber warfare is not just when they hit J.P. Morgan. We're doing it all of the time. So is everybody else, because you can't, hate to say this, you can't wait till the next war to discover what the enemy's cyber vulnerabilities are, what his nodes are. So I mean, in our own government, if you say, we need to absolutely, bang, put a firewall in, stop this, make it an international treaty, somebody's going to say, well, Mr. President, to be honest with you, this would really be very difficult in the terms of national intelligence, and you would be sacrificing. I said, oh, God, I mean, what am I going to do? So we've stalled on this, and it's getting worse and worse. As my friends in the industry tell you, anything that's done by software can be undone by software. So this is going to be a continuing struggle for a long time. And then there's financial system stability. Of course, that's connected to cyber, too, as we know with J.P. Morgan. But we don't even understand the American economy. And so when you ask someone to regulate a bank, I was sitting in a meeting in a big bank in New York about 6 months ago, and we were talking about real estate, and there were these 3 young bankers there, and we were talking about doing a transaction. They said, we're going to have to design some new debt instruments to be able to pick up these old shopping malls, and we need a new structure. I'm thinking, God, I'm at ground zero for the next financial crisis. They're designing new debt instruments. Oh, God. But we haven't. If you went back and looked at the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission, which was empowered to look at the cause, we passed legislation before the committee could even figure out what caused the problem. We thought we knew what the problem was, and we passed the legislation, and we haven't actually had a process to go back and say, hey, here's what the problem was according to the best minds in the business, and here's what we did to fix it. Does it match? And of course, we haven't done that, and there's lots of pressure not to do that. More importantly, what we've seen is that the financial system has really overwhelmed much of the economy. It's a natural thing because all of us in business know that if you have a business and you invest your own money in it, you can grow it, and it's called revenue-led growth. But if you really want to grow it fast, why not take out a loan? Don't wait for your earnings. Do it on leverage. And especially if you're a banker, you like that leverage. Today, you can not only make a loan, but you can, after you've loaned the money out, you can then sell it, and you can make money on that, and then you have no liability for the loan. And they don't keep those loans. They sell those loans, and then insurance companies buy them, and then they're shipped overseas. And it's an amazingly intricate network, and there's people who really understand this. this much of it. This little slice of what they do, they understand. But if you ask them, well, what's this and how does that impact and how, nobody does it. Nobody can model it. In the military, we worked through scenario after scenario after scenario, and we looked at risk, and we looked at how to issue orders and commanders' critical information requirements. You get in the financial community, it's just go, 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 what'd you get done today? And I mean, nobody's really in charge as long as you meet your number and can get away with it. That's the way it works. Now, you say it shouldn't work that way. Well, that's the economy. When you're dealing with risk in the economy, and for those of you who are mostly in the policy world, and I've been with like 80 businesses, and I'm on like too many boards right now, so I won't even tell you how many they are. But there's so many different variables. It's so much more complicated than trying to deal with national security risk. It really is. These companies are floating like chips on the ocean. They think they're paddling and making headway, but they're swaying to macroeconomic forces, geostrategic forces, financial forces, and they can get wiped out. Little companies do. That's why people want to invest in blue chips, And the volatility has gone up in the last 10 or 15 years for these forces. So we now have more debt in the economy than we've ever had. In other words, we have less dry powder. So if something goes wrong again, the way a financial crisis usually occurs is there's a lot of debt, and then some smart guy on Wall Street says, just adding up, if you add up A, B, and C, and you take a ratio of, and they make up a ratio, 15 years debt plus 2 years earnings plus CapEx minus depreciation, and you look at this ratio is way out of line. That means we run a regression over the last 30 years. That's going to fail. But then most of these companies are going to fail. And then I'm going to bet against it. And the guy gives a couple of speeches. People say, what's he doing? Pretty soon the momentum picks up and everybody realizes they can make more money if the market crashes. And there was a lot of that downward sentiment in 2007 when I was working on Wall Street with Goldman Sachs. You could feel it. And you knew that people were going to make money. I know a guy made $3 billion betting against mortgage-backed securities. And so that's there. And the problem is that so much of our energy is caught up in the financial system that we've neglected the investment in real things that are required to take the country forward. Roads and bridges and airports. And go to LaGuardia and lug your bags back and forth. People from China think they've landed in a third world country when they look at most U.S. airports. So it's been a distortion of the economy, this excessive reliance. It's very hard to understand it. Most people, in fact, almost nobody can see the big picture of it. And we're at high risk of repeating a problem with something we don't understand. And the distortion has sapped the vitality of the real economy and job growth and income and earnings among ordinary Americans.
And you'd also said, from an R&D standpoint, guys are not making the kind of R&D that they ought to make because, largely the compensation structures for the companies are in stock, so it's a short-term reward.
My mother loved Ronald Reagan. When she would watch him on General Electric Theater, she'd say, in the 50s, she'd say, oh, Ronald Reagan is so wonderful. He'd come on in a cameo, he would say, at GE, progress is our most important product. What would Ronald Reagan say if you told him that GE spends more money on stock buybacks than it does on R&D? In 1950, stock buybacks were illegal. They were considered market manipulation. Now, investment analysts look at that company and say, well, that company's really smart. I think their stock's going to continue to grow up because they've got a really great stock buyback program. It does nothing for the economy. But, that's back. We could talk forever about the financial system. We've got the problem of the ascent of China. There's no historical precedent for this. People say, well, Japan, they came over here, tried to buy up half the country. We bought it back from them at a half price 10 years later. Yeah, that's Japan. 1/10 the size of China. They say Germany. Well, Germany never had the scale to challenge the rest of the world like China could have. They say Russia, the Soviet Union. They weren't connected into the global economy. This is unique, sui generis. We have to find a way to bring China with us. Don't want to fight a war with them, but they see the world through their own self-interest, their historical legacy, through the lens of the Communist Party, and we're not going to impose democracy, and we don't want to on China. They have to choose their own system of government, but we have to help them understand that their self-interest is best served if they move into the international structure that we helped build at the end of World War II, rather than destroy it and try to create a China-centric structure.
Which fed their own economic growth, right?
Yeah.
That stability is what was the central feature of their...
Exactly. And then, and then there's climate change. And, it's out there, it's real, it's big, it's growing. And if you look at Syria, of course, one of the reasons we have problems in Syria is because what happened in Syria was not a political revolt against Bashar al-Assad. You might think it was, but it wasn't. It was 600,000 farmers who'd been dispossessed off their land. They couldn't grow crops, they couldn't make a living because Assad's agricultural reform had taken away their water. And that was the tinder that burst into flame and caused the blow up in Syria. It's climate change, and it's all over the Sahel, in East Africa and elsewhere, and it will become a growing national security problem, economic problem. We've got to deal with these things, and there's no simple, quick fix.
The question, though, is that you make a series of proposals through the books. For example, tax credits, and even one small tax credit debate, in Washington can stop the entire freight train. And at a time when we can't even, on a sadly fundamental basis, tie our political shoes, how do you manage to drive a truly strategic process forward? It's hyperpartisanship. You toy at one point of saying that you need sort of an extra you need some external panel even, which has become, I guess, some way that we try to solve all of our problems, whether you try to bracket or something. How do you manage, and oh, by the way, in the middle of this, you also have 50% of the American people don't even believe that climate change is a real thing, right? Even though water levels are rising, or declining, or how do you drive this? How are you going to drive this? Because any one of these things is contentious enough to not work at all.
Right. No, I know. And Francis Fukuyama's got a new book out, and he talks about our failure, and Philip Howard talks about excessive bureaucratization and so forth. I mean, these are really difficult problems, and I can't prescribe a solution for each one of them. But what I can say is that you can't solve them easily unless you can give the economy a growth spurt. Unless there are more resources to divvy up, you can't get at these problems effectively. Americans love to argue about the national debt. It's one of the most consistent themes in American politics going back generations. It wrecked us during the Depression, when even Roosevelt came to office in 1933 thinking that he had to solve the problem of the Depression without deficit spending. He gave up on it, and finally Keynes put it in perspective for us, and we learned about aggregate demand and fiscal policy. But Friedman reversed it, and we're back to the monetarist theory, and so this is a lot. So if you want to do it, you're not going to get everybody to take a course in Macro 101 and go back to Keynes. What you have to do is you have to stimulate the economy. You can't do it with government spending, but you could do it with private investment, because there's $7 trillion out there. And people are pretty hungry. And the place to do it is in hydrocarbons. This country has so much oil and gas, we could become completely energy independent in 5 to 7 years. You've got to invest in some things. You can't just do it with fracking. You've got to take natural gas and convert it into diesel. You've got to take coal and convert that into diesel and jet fuel. But we've got so much coal, so much natural gas, and so much oil, and so much money, and all the technologies there. Coal to liquids, the Germans had this process that was actually two processes developed in the 1920s, because we boycotted, we kept Germany from getting oil in World War I. So the German chemists, developed this process, and We bombed these so-called sin fuel plants in World War II. There were 26 of them. And then we said, it's a secret. So we brought it back to the United States. It's called Fischer-Tropsch process. We put one in 1949, was killed in the Eisenhower administration. Tried it again in the Carter administration, killed in the Reagan administration, because the oil market is very volatile. And unless you have a sense of national strategy, what happens is you extend these plants for a couple of years with government aid, and it says, that plant's just losing money. They're no good, you know. But it's just the fluctuations in the price of oil. But we've got everything we need right now. We just need to do it. Within 7 years, if we really launched a program committed to independence, real energy independence, we'd be energy independent and exporting crude oil as well as refined products.
Which you also, though, look at as a transitional phase, right? Because you take advantage of that as you're investing in something that is completely carbon neutral.
It is a transitional phrase, but you've got, you know, what I have to say to my friends in the environmental movement is very painful. They don't even like to eat meat, some of them, you know, because cows emit too much methane. It's not efficient.
But they are tasty, aren't they?
Yeah. But the truth is that we've got 250 million cars and light trucks that are using gasoline. We're using 3 million barrels a day of distillate. If you simply said, no more, we'd all be walking. Can't run the world without petroleum or petroleum-like products. So we've got to have a transition phase. And if we're going to continue to use them, who could be better and more sensitive and capable of taking care of the environment than we? So let's take it over. That's the heart of what I'm proposing as a national strategy. Not building a defense industrial complex. That was Ike's. Build an energy security complex. That's what we need for the 21st century. I called it energy-enabled strategy in the book.
Right. Well, speaking of the Chinese, one of the things which you say, I think, quite astutely in this is that we also have to be very cognizant. Now, everybody talks about cooperating, and the council this week had two, great sessions, and Kurt Campbell was part of both of them, where he was talking about it. And everybody wants to talk about the E word, the engagement word with it. But one of the things that you say is sort of unblinkingly that they actually may not be terribly interested in engaging. Well, no, you have to have that option that they actually are not interested in doing some of the things that we want them to do.
Yeah.
So, on that level, how, and I know that you're talking about, harnessing them for economic interest, but one of the things that you talk about, and if you look, and I'd like to get your thoughts as a former, SACUR on, the Russians in Eastern Europe, but if you look at it, it's the exploitation of these gray zones to try to exert influence, looking at China obviously as, we're growing, you're in decline, right?
Yeah.
And not a relative way. I can actually afford to ignore you. All of this territory was mine anyway. I'm not really being imperialist. It's all mine. How do you deal in that kind of a world where guys are exploring the gray zone and actually may not give much of a damn about what we have to say in the next number of years?
Well, you can't just do it with military force, and this is what's happened to us on the pivot policy. We announced a pivot. The next thing you know, there's 2,000 Marines announced they're going to end up in Australia. And the Chinese say, you have an alliance with Singapore? Come on, Singapore? I mean, they laugh, they sneer at us, So now what you have to do with China is you have to start by rebuilding their awe of America. They were in awe of America. 2005, when I was there, a young guy who'd spent a year at the Kennedy Center and was very close to the leadership of China, said to me, he says, we know that you and Britain were best friends and Britain gave you leadership of the world. He said, China wants to be your best friend, so you'll give us leadership of the world. And, you say that to Americans, they all smile, say, oh, the Chinese are so naive, and besides, they could never, but that's the way they felt. They knew that they could become leaders, and they wanted to do it in a friendly fashion. After 2008, when they look at us, they say, boy, it's a shame about America. We'll take from it what we can, still got some great universities, we'll send some people over there, use their capital, take their technology, they've still got a great military, but their political system's broken. Their economy's not going anywhere, and the future belongs to us. Now, the National Intelligence Council estimate says the Chinese believe that this decade is their decade of decision. So you can look at what China's doing now with the Air Defense Identification Zone, the assertion of the 9-dash line, the Senkaku Islands, and others, and say they're getting ready to make a move. But like all moves in foreign policy, you can see them foreshadowed. You can see it coming. There's never like a bolt from the blue. The Chinese have said for 25 or 30 years they want their land back. Okinawa belonged to China. Now, can you imagine when a Chinese newspaper, official newspaper, says Okinawa, you know, that's a Chinese property. They sort of dribble it out there and say, let's see who says anything about it. Well, no one said anything yet. So it'll come up again, and they're watching Ukraine because they're asking themselves, if Russia can get Crimea, couldn't we do something in Taiwan? Does it work in Taiwan? Let's say there's some little green men that show up in Taiwan and I mean, no, they can
with
do
masks,
that.
so that you can't really tell where they come
they're
from.
looking. They're saying, what's the reaction of the West? Can we get away with it? Can we? Nobody at this stage wants a major war. Not Putin, and certainly not Xi Jinping. He's got to worry about the economy. He's got to keep his legitimacy. But can he have some of his cake right now and still have the cake there? Can he have some cake and eat it too? I mean, he likes the cake. But he'd like just a little advanced serving, please, of what he's going to get later. So they're looking to do this. This is going to happen unless we can, A, raise our economic strength, B, be smart enough with China to talk to them privately, show them respect, stop arguing about things that aren't significant strategically, and lay it on the line on things that are strategic. Look, they're talking about building their new intercontinental ballistic missile system and deploying submarine launch missiles, and they've made an announcement they can blow up half the United States. Now, we need to go right to China and say, listen, you want to get in a technology race with us? We'll do it. And I'll tell you something. We've worked on our anti-ballistic missile system for a long time. We're ready to go against North Korean threat. We can extend it. Yeah, we'll box you in with intercept capabilities. You want to have an arms race? We'll have one. But if you don't, let's do something else. And let's work together. And we need to have that conversation privately. And I hate to say this because I do believe that human rights and civil rights are important, and we're going to have to keep working it with the Chinese. But the biggest thing that has to come out of these dialogues is not the release of the latest political prisoner, but it's really a deeper understanding. Now, we've got this strategic dialogue going with China, but a lot of it hasn't had the traction that it needs. And when Xi Jinping saw Obama a year and a half ago in California, we had a couple of problems with that. We thought it went pretty well. The Chinese were insulted, deeply insulted, that Mrs. Obama wasn't there. He brought his wife. He wanted to be recognized as a peer, as a global figure. And where was Mrs. Obama? So there's been all kinds of behind-the-scenes apologies and angst over this. And then he told the president that he wanted to be treated as a global equal. And what we said is, you got to stop stealing stuff with your cyber thieves. And he said, if you're doing something, we're doing something that you think is against the law, prove it and charge us. Well, it took us a while. We could put 5 guys under indictment. But, you know, that's not much of an outcome from a summit, is it? It's, you know, we ended the summit with more misunderstandings than we began it with.
But one of the points that you made is that in negotiations, especially democracies that are going up against something, the nations other than democracy, folks want to show that they've made some sort of progress, and that often means giving the farm away in ways that consistently happens, and then what happens is that border creep is happening on a lot of different axes.
You know, Western leaders always think that they can go in and charm some dictator and get what they want. I saw it time and again with Milosevic in the Balkans, and the same thing operates in China. If you're an elected leader, especially a foreign minister in a parliamentary system, and you go to China, come home and say, what did you get done in China? Your colleagues ask you, say, I got a new treaty. And so, does it mean anything? No, but normally you have to give something away to get it.
Right.
And China operates on long-term vision. It doesn't operate on the basis of personalities and so
Or your
forth.
election in a year.
They've got a vision. Xi Jinping knows where he's going to go. He's got control through the Communist Party. Is it perfect? No. He couldn't stop these demonstrators in Hong Kong easily, but he did get it under control. But he's got something that's far different and a far different outlook than we have in American politics. And time and again, you see our elected political leaders trying to understand Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin through our own lens of understanding. So I've tried to talk about that a little bit.
I want to open it up to the floor, but I want to ask one quick question about Russia. If you look at what Russia has been doing, right, it is, highly destabilizing. He knows how to turn the knob up and down to achieve what he wants. The NATO summit, 2 days after the president said that the border of Europe is inviolate, and summit leaders went ahead and said all of the same sorts of stuff, the Russians, the FSB, came across the Estonian border, grabbed an Estonian counterintelligence officer, took him back. I think he's still sitting in Moscow, unless I'm mistaken. And not a lot of people have said a lot about it. There hasn't been a lot of coverage since that moment, which was troubling, I think, to put it mildly. Again, it's exploiting these sort of gray areas on an incessant basis.
True.
You were a former SACEUR. What's the right way to be handling this situation?
We have to understand the way Putin thinks and to differentiate it from the way we think. Putin's a geostrategist. That's the way that they're all trained. So it's like this country. Is it my country or your country? If it's your country, I want it. If it's my country, I'm keeping it. And that's the way they operate.
What's yours, what's mine is mine, and what's yours is mine too.
Sure. So, he bemoans the loss of the Soviet Union. Now, as a geostrategist, he has to look at China as a threat. And it's the greatest threat. He knows it. When I was give you an example of this, I was in Kazakhstan, and the deputy prime minister, or the number 2 in China, Wen Jiabao, came to Kazakhstan in 2005, and he was meeting people. He went to a reception. He said, "How many people are in this country?" Well, the answer is like 15 million. Kazakhstan's like 3 times the size of Texas. And Wen Jiabao said, in passing, he says, "I pity them." Sure, because they're right next door to China. So Putin has to feel that. So if you were Putin and you're a long-term planner, what are you thinking? You're thinking, I'm going to get my lunch eaten by China. The only way I can handle it myself is if I can be stronger. How do I get stronger? I got to have Ukraine back. How do I get Ukraine back? I got to pry it out of the hands of the West. He's been doing this for years. He's got the control of the electricity grid. He's got the gas. He's got air defense. He's got border security. He's infiltrated the armed forces, the police, the governmental structure. He's bought off the oligarchs. Everything was going pretty much okay until those darn people got out in the Maidan Square and saw through it and started protesting, and it blew the whole plan. And then he had to go back to his war plan, which he's rehearsed. Zapad 2009, Zapad 2013, 4 phases: terrorism, insurgency, main forces, and then driving off NATO. We thought these war plans were about terrorists coming into the Soviet Union, or into Russia rather, but they aren't. They're about Russians creating terrorists. So they actually played out the war plan against us in Ukraine. So they sent the Spetsnaz in, they were the terrorists. Then they sent the GRU in to build the insurgency up. Then they sent the regular forces in to control it. And in their war games, they always use a nuke to finish it off. They use nukes for de-escalation. In other words, what they say is, okay, if NATO starts to come in, what we'll do is we'll fire a couple of nukes off. Maybe we'll hit Norfolk. That's a favorite target. And maybe Warsaw. And NATO will be shocked and jump back. Well, he actually ran through his war plan against Ukraine this summer. But what he sees is, if he plays this right, in 6 months, if he plays it right, he'll have Ukraine. He'll have Bashar Assad in control of most of Syria, thanks to U.S. air power. And he'll have sanctions released because he's been good in following through. It hasn't been his fault that Ukraine collapsed.
And he'll have 2 Mistral amphibious ships by then.
He'll have
too.
the Mistral ships. He'll be invited to the G20 summit in Australia. And he'll still have the Americans saying, we have to have Russian help. We're in a place, he's in a geostrategic world. And we look at him and say, oh, he can't keep going. We got sanctions against him. Yeah, he likes those sanctions because what happens is the people that weren't his friends say, you've caused us problems. He says, I will help you. You know, I'll give you money. He likes that. It gives him greater control. We saw Milosevic do the same thing in the Balkans. So we know the sanctions actually, in some ways, they may hurt the economy, but they promote his control. And we say, he's got big domestic problems. Yeah, he does. I mean, these mothers don't like their kids being killed in Ukraine. But you know, if you use this correctly, it's like the Chinese 100 Flowers campaign. It says, let 100 flowers bloom. Let those who would object, object. And then they've identified themselves and you take them out. So there's an entirely different mindset that you have to understand when you're working against Putin or with China. Different.
Questions? Yes, sir.
Hi, welcome, General. I'm Erdoğan Şipoli, and I'm writing my dissertation, PhD dissertation on the promotion of democracy, American great strategy, and then what went wrong to where America is now, especially in the Middle East. So I'm comparing more the Balkans because I'm from there, and what happened to the Middle East. So I'm really interested in your view of what went wrong with the American engagement with the Middle East, especially with Islam.
I just don't think that you can start with political rights and democracy in Islam. I asked Prime Minister Hariri about this in 2004. You know, I was one of these officers at Fort Leavenworth in 1975 who scoffed at the Helsinki Accord when we had the Russians or the Soviet Union had to sign and agree to human rights and freedom of assembly and so all that stuff. Said, they'll never do it. But it actually helped bring down the Iron Curtain because they were exposed as hypocrites. I ran that argument in front of Prime Minister Hariri of Lebanon. He said, he smiled. He said, look, it just won't work here. He said, before you can do democracy here, you have to fix economic rights. You have to end the family-owned businesses, and you have to establish the kind of structures that you have in the West where everybody has a stake in the economy, everybody has capital, you can buy shares of stock, and people feel an ownership and a sense of participation and legitimacy. Then you can move to democracy. So I think we got the cart before the horse. Now, I could talk for a long time on this, but you know, we established this National Endowment for Democracy back in the Reagan administration, and it's a big offensive weapon for America. One of the first things Putin did when he became president was tell the other members of the stands, get rid of the NDI and IRI, the National Democratic Institute, International Republican Institute. We don't want these NGOs here. They're subversive. You think, oh, that's so mean. Well, not really. I mean, you know, we got rid of the Communist Party in the United States a long time ago because it was doing the same thing in the United States that NDI and IRI, and Ronald Reagan knew it. When he established the National Endowment for Democracy, he used their own technique against them. But what's kind of scary about it is if you were sitting in Beijing and you looked at these people in the streets in Hong Kong and you read this line in the newspaper that said, some of these people got money from the International Republican Institute to help form these protests, that would make you mad. Just like if we had a problem in this country and you said, you know, it's the Manchurian candidate. It's Chinese money coming in here. We don't allow it. We try not to allow it. So we're going to all have to learn to get along on a smaller planet. And we can't push, just because we think democracy is so great, I mean, just look at it. Here. Is it so great? Is it working so well right now? And the answer is no, it's a process. We think we can work through this, but you can't lay that process out. The best democracy in the Middle East right now is Iran, I guess. They seem to hold regular elections and 99% of the people vote.
Harlan.
Wes, always good to see you and always good to listen to you. I want to ask you about implementation. As you know, my view is that our system of checks and balances is broken, and that's not going to be repaired easily. And so pick one of your areas, say energy policy. How would you implement it? Because when you take a look at the details, obviously you're aware of all the people who oppose Keystone Pipeline. Seems to be a no-brainer. Fracking destroys the world. Even if you got what you wanted, we only have one seaport capable of having large tankers, and the environmentalists and EPA prevent you from judging the others. So take us through how you would implement one of your big ideas, say energy independence.
You have to implement it at the top politically. So you have to bring the big companies and the environmental leaders in, and you need some meetings in the White House, and you need some presidential jawboning, and you have to work that. You've got to work it simultaneously with their supporters on the Hill, and you've got to see what's doable in that big idea. Can you give something more to the environmental movement? Well, I think you can, because if you don't do something about this fracking, you're going to release so damn much methane to the atmosphere that it's going to vitiate all your other climate change efforts, because the pipes leak and the pipelines leak. So wouldn't you like to have some better environmental controls? Sure. What are you prepared to give up for it? And so you got to go through the horse trading on this. And then what I would do at the executive level is I would create some energy development districts. So you go out to Colorado and Wyoming, they got some shares, say, how much you guys produce right now? I said, we're doing like 550,000 barrels a day. Said, I want you to get up to 1.5 million barrels a day. Got 6 months to tell me what needs to be done. Give me a combination DOE, EPA, DOJ team, accelerate the permitting, accelerate the legal challenges, invite all the legal challenges to come in, have an expedited review process. Can you do that? You can if you can, as a leader, create the right sense of urgency in the country. It's not business as usual. Now, we've got these 5 major challenges. Can't we use those to create enough of a sense of urgency to help us modify? I went to the White House with this, and I sat there on a Friday afternoon with Gene Sperling and Jason Furman. I said, energy development districts, I know this is the way we do it. We task the departments and we get out there and we really help. And they're like, oh God, today is like the 31st of August and we created 0 jobs last month. 0, and we have to face the press. And they're looking at me and their eyes are glazing over, and of course they don't get it because they're working at the macroeconomic level. I'm trying to work at the implementation level. But you asked me how I do it, that's how I would do it. It can be done.
Paolo?
Thank you. Paolo von Schirach Report. On this particular issue of energy, which I think I agree with you, it's the low-hanging fruit, since we got so much of it. One of the proposals, and I think talking about the implementation, I don't know if you look into this, but one of the opportunities that we have, and that quite frankly nobody talks about, is to use natural gas as transportation fuel. In particular, the low-hanging fruit there is heavy trucks. We're talking about the possibility to convert a fleet of about 9 million 18-wheelers to either CNG or LNG, with savings of about 3 million barrels of oil a day. This would require some kind of leadership because there's a bit of a chicken and the egg picture of not having the refueling stations and
Arkansas has a plan. Texas has a plan. America doesn't have a plan. When you look at countries like Romania, and I do a lot of work in Romania. I love them. They're great people. What they need is not to have be chewed out about corruption. They need jobs. Now, how do you get those jobs? Well, if you think that economic diplomacy is simply telling the Romanians, you better be nice to General Motors and Chevron or they won't come here. That's not economic diplomacy. That's the kind of holding governments hostage that these car companies do to the states in the southern part of the United States. We're not going to go there unless you give us $1 billion of tax relief, and then we might leave tomorrow after we get the $1 billion.
You sound like Snyder looking for a new stadium in Washington, D.C.
Well, you look at how Cowboy Stadium, not Cowboy Stadium, but look how the Texas Rangers baseball stadium was built. The people of Arlington paid for that with a sales tax. That's typical of the way it's done. That doesn't necessarily create jobs. What you need in Romania is you need real infrastructure development. You need companies to come in there and do it. They've got to be sure that they can handle the risk. Okay, you get political risk insurance. They've got to be sure they can get a return. And when they go to Wall Street is totally different now than it was in 2005. In 2005, you couldn't give enough money away. It's like, oh, you need some money here? I got $100 million. Now it's like, well, has McKinsey done a due diligence report on this? Well, McKinsey said it's okay. Well, has it gone to the World Bank? What did they say? Said, well, can we do another 6-month study on this? Well, after we've looked at it, we think there's still too much technology risk, market risk, currency exchange risk, interest rate risk, and geopolitical risk, and no, we can't do this. But we would invest in Alibaba if you can get us the stock the day before it goes public at 1/3 the market price tomorrow. That's the way Wall Street works today. I don't mean to belittle these people. They're serious people. They're working hard. They want to do the best thing they can for themselves, their families, and their firms. But the people that put money into Wall Street are highly risk averse today. They've been burned twice, once on the dot-com bubble and once on the collapse in 2008. And they're handling our pension funds. And they're not about to go waste money in Africa or Eastern Europe if it's not really solid. And so, you say, well, but you're like fighting, right hand fighting against the left hand. Yeah, that's our system. So if you want those investments to happen, you got to have a sovereign wealth fund to goose it, make it happen.
Yes, sir.
Good evening, sir. John Finney. I had the privilege of serving with S4 in Bosnia during your tenure at SACEUR.
Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership then, and congratulations on an excellent book. I'd like to ask you a question, sir, about a statement you made in your section on Israel, when you said Israel does not need excessive U.S. military support.
Right.
And I wonder if you might elaborate on that. Do you believe it's still useful and important to continue the Camp David Accord funds that we provide to Israel? And would like to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you, sir.
I do believe it's important, but I shudder every time someone proposes that we should put U.S. troops in to assure the peace between Israel and the West Bank or Israel and Gaza. And occasionally you hear a proposal like this floated, because as soon as you put that in there, then our troops become the target, and the American political system is held hostage. Israel is technologically modern. It's made an incredible economic recovery. It's fully capable of defending itself, and we need to protect Israel with its own problems and its own politics from the vagaries of the American political system. If we really believe that the security of Israel is in our vital interest, don't infect it.
Thank you, sir.
Let me just, go ahead, yes.
Thank you. Leandra Bernstein, RIA Novosti. Question on Russia. Some people say that that the United States shouldn't get involved, has no real business intervening in Russia, Ukraine. Others, including an official from the Pentagon, have suggested that in the future we might actually provide lethal military aid to the government forces in Ukraine. So I'd like to get your views on U.S. involvement there. You did make some remarks on how Putin is playing a geostrategic game, we're playing a political game.
So if you look at the challenges facing the United States, none of these challenges can be handled effectively unless we have really tight relations with the countries that most share our values. That's Europe. We fought 2 wars in the 20th century to make sure that Western Europe didn't fall under the dominion of a hostile power. We recognized that it would be crippling to the United States if we were not on the best of terms and had closest relationships with Western Europe. After the Second World War, we created NATO. When we look ahead, we need that linkage with Europe to help manage the ascent of China, to deal effectively with cybersecurity, to work the financial system. Europe's 500+ million people in the EU, a GDP about the size of ours, and if we're at odds with Europe, then we can't exercise effective American leadership. We need Europe bound to us. That's NATO, that's security. And you know, it's like that old song from the 1950s. You probably haven't heard it on the radio station recently, but it's like the knee bone's connected to the thigh bone's connected to the hip bone, and so forth. And in Europe, everything's connected. So I asked a prime minister of an Eastern European country, would you be prepared to give military assistance to Ukraine? They're your neighbors. He said, no. He said, no, we're afraid. I said, what are you afraid of? He said, we're afraid of Russia. I said, but you're a member of NATO. He said, yes, but we're afraid of Russia because the United States hasn't taken the lead on this. All through Eastern Europe, the work with Russia has created a sense, or the failure to stand up more strongly for Ukraine has created a sense of uncertainty and doubt. And you know, we maintained peace and security during the Cold War because we had this argument about the coupling of the United States and Europe. And people would say, well, you know, at one time, but why would we trade New York for Hamburg? And the Europeans would doubt us. We kept American forces over there. We moved nuclear weapons into Europe. We had exercises like Able Archer, where we practiced the fact that if Russia attacked Germany, we would not simply say, gee, that's very unfortunate. We'll come back to you through the United Nations next week. We were immediately involved and engaged. And we held that coupling as the critical element of security. It was U.S. credibility. No American president during the Cold War ever said when he would use nuclear weapons, because we knew that the decision to use nuclear weapons had to be incalculable. Because if you drew a red line or made it calculable, the adversary would find a way around it. And as a result, deterrence held. We think that's because our policy was smart. We're never really sure on deterrence because we don't really see it from the other side that well, but we think it was a good policy. We still need that policy. We still need that linkage just as much as we did then. We don't need Ukraine as a member of NATO. We shouldn't put it in NATO. It's a different country. It was never our plan when we were talking about NATO enlargement to bring Ukraine into NATO. But when a nation of 45 million people, the largest nation in Eastern Europe, wants to have its own form of government and is invaded by another country, and it comes to us and asks for help, and we say, not so fast. I was in Crimea, I was in Kiev shortly after Crimea fell in March, and I was talking to the Minister of Defense, who's no longer the Minister of Defense here. He said, well, I called my, I knew these Russian generals, we were all in the Red Army together. I called them, I said, please, we're going to, just don't hurt our soldiers. We're going to give you Crimea. And I worked this back up, and as I was leaving, I called the U.S. ambassador, and I said, well, we didn't tell them they couldn't protect their own country, did we? We didn't tell them to give up Crimea, did we?
Two questions. I'm going to take this, and I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative to ask a broad question.
Well, since you took a question on Israel, perhaps you would take the question on Egypt, where we have a continuing $1.5 billion program when we ought not to be very happy with the Egyptian government. And if I could add to that, since we're now in the Middle East, say a few words about Turkey, our relationship with Erdogan right now, and our strategy of air, but nothing under the air.
Yeah. Well, with respect to Egypt, I think you got to be careful pushing Egypt to re-democratized too fast. Didn't work the first time. And they've known for a long time that if you held votes over there, the Muslim Brotherhood was going to win. I mean, that was the whole thing behind Mubarak year after year after year. So when people wanted to push him out really fast, it was dangerous. And when we saw in these young people in the square in Cairo a mirror image of our own young people with cell phones and stuff and thought, hey, they're going to make a country just like ours and we'll like it, it was dangerous. So I think right now where we are is that the President Sisi is going to have to find his own way forward. He's dealing with an insurgency. He's got to find a way of relieving the political tensions. He's got to work education. But he's caught up in this larger tableau of the modernization of Islam. And we're not going to solve that problem in Egypt alone. And we can't put all of that burden on Egypt to solve it. So just my view is set Egypt aside for a minute. Then go to Turkey. So with Turkey, they're asking us to put some no-fly zone over northern Syria so that they can put their ground forces in. I don't see why we don't do that. It was one thing before, when we weren't engaged at all and we were withdrawing. We're dropping bombs right now in the area, so we're putting our aircraft in. We're monitoring Syrian radar. We're jamming or doing whatever else we have to do to deliver those bombs successfully. So take it the next step, bring the Turks in on the ground, but you tell the moderate Syrian opposition, and I know some of these people, tell them, look, you guys have been talking for years about how you want to, have your own piece of the country, and all you need is U.S. air cover. Fine, go make Aleppo your capital, go on the ground. Let's prove that you can take a little slice of Syria, run up a flag, call it Free Syria. This is your country. You go in there, sign the agreement with Turkey, say, Turkey, please come help me while I build up my armed forces, and promise you'll leave in a year when they get finished being trained. And maybe we get the Turks to do it. And then you've got people on the ground who can fight. You've got people in training. You've got a government that's working to exercise political control. And you've got an alternative to what's going on right now, which is U.S. air power enabling Bashar Assad to roll forward. Is it difficult? Sure. Are there tensions between Turkey, the Kurds, the PKK, the Peshmerga, the every other group in Syria? Of course, there are lots of tensions. Can they be worked out? I don't know. But I know that you can't succeed against ISIS without boots on the ground. That's a necessary but not sufficient condition. The sufficient condition is you must have effective governance on the ground. And these ungoverned areas can't be governed by U.S. forces. We proved in Iraq we can't do it. We don't speak Arabic. We're infidels. We don't go into their homes. We're not interrelated to them in an effective way. And our presence there draws hostility and serves as a recruiting magnet for ISIS.
So the boots aren't necessarily American boots, is what you're saying?
I hope they're not American boots.
I hope that there are guys in the Army who are listening to you. The one last question, I'm getting the magic sign that the festivities are about to end, but one question which I did want to ask you, which I think goes to the heart of what you're talking about, is the United States as the superpower, the saying goes, it has to always act the part of the superpower. There is no vacation for the United States. And sometimes the United States has to do stuff that is tougher, harder, even in terms of delivering messages to people. And it's sort of, sometimes the gnat's got to get killed by the, by the sledgehammer just to, to encourage the others that, what you were saying about defining of the lines. Do you agree with that? Does the United States always have to act the role of the superpower? Otherwise, it loses that superpower status and ferments confusion among friend and foe alike.
I don't think the United States always has to act as the superpower. I think it's important to encourage others to take some of the burden. That's why we have NATO. Otherwise, we wouldn't need NATO. It would be all U.S. But I think, if you were sitting in the White House, in the cockpit of the White House, you'd probably feel like, what is all this criticism of leadership? I mean, we're making dozens of decisions every day in the United States. We're doing this, we're not doing that. They come and ask for this, we say yes. They ask for that, we say no, not yet, come back later. I mean, it's not like people in the White House aren't in charge. The most difficult military operation is a withdrawal under pressure. When you have forces engaged on the ground, the enemy's attacking you, and you're trying to leapfrog back and not get surrounded, wiped out, or cut off, and morale is bad, and people think, God, what are we, you know, they're coming after us. I mean, we've seen this done at the tactical level. The question is, can we do it effectively at the strategic level, where it's not just military forces coming back, but we've discovered, believe it or not, that Afghanistan is not going to be the 51st state. And neither is Iraq. They're just not going to be there. We don't even have Puerto Rico yet. So we're not going to make, so if that's the case, they're going to have to build their own country. And that means we can't continue to be there indefinitely. Can we keep 10,000 troops in there? Sure, we can keep that. As long as we don't start losing a lot of troops. We can do it indefinitely, as long as they're friendly to us. It will be a balance. But this part of the world has proved extremely difficult and resistant to outsiders coming in. Historically, Afghanistan, even Iraq, it's very difficult. And so we should be under no illusion. These people need to come to terms with their own destiny. And we can help. We can take actions to protect our vital interests, but we can't do it for them. And so the process of redeploying from the excessive, grandiose visions of the neoconservative movement at the turn of the 21st century to where we are more realistically today and facing what are the 5 real problems that I've identified over a long term, got to do that in a way that people don't misunderstand. We're the big dog on the block, and we've got the talent, the resources, the skill, the population, the scale, and the political system to continue to be the world's leading power if we will just use it wisely.
Well said, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks very, very much, General Clark. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it very much.